Welcome to Whispered Dream Nights. My name is Selene, and tonight I'll guide you through a gentle dreaming world. Close your eyes, soften your breath, and let the night carry you. We begin. There is a village at the edge of the sky, where roofs are the color of river stones, and the streets forget to echo after dusk. By day, the villagers mend nets, grind spices, and hang strings of dried pears from the beams of their doorways. By night, they sleep beneath a canopy of stars so clear that even the smallest child knows the names of 3 constellations. Names passed down like lullabies: the swan of first light, the lantern of returning, the quiet crown. In this village lives Lyra, daughter of the last moonweaver. The moonweaver was a title given only when needed, and for a long time the sky needed nothing. It wore its light like a shawl of silver thread, self-mending, self-knowing. But then the shawl began to fray. It didn't tear. No, it loosened. The spaces between stars grew wider, as if daylight had forgotten to close the door behind it. Dreams came unwoven. People woke in the night with the taste of ashes and could not remember why they were sad. Lyra's mother, Elawin, once drew the moon's threads across a loom as wide as the horizon. She could coax a faint star back to brightness with a whisper and a steady hand. "We do not force the night," she would tell Lyra. "We invite it." But Elowin's hands had grown still, her silver hair a river that no longer wished to move. "The loom will answer you," she whispered one evening, "when you are ready to ask it a tender question." Lyra did not feel ready. She had woven baskets and rush mats and the thin, cool curtains that made summer windows soft. But the moon, the stars, those felt like elders she should not touch. Yet each night, as the sky thinned, the river near the village ran slower, as if it, too, were listening for a lost thread. The change, when it came, was quiet. Lyra woke just before dawn to a sound like a fingertip skating across a water glass. One high, fragile note. She followed it out of bed, barefoot across the cool floor, down the hall where the scent of rosemary slept in the beams. She opened the back door and found the note waiting for her in the garden, perched on a strand of spider silk. The silk shimmered with dew, and in each bead of dew she saw a small, perfect moon. "Come," the dew sang without words. "Come and ask." Lyra took her mother's lantern from the wall peg and did not light it. The lantern knew the path in the dark better than fire did. It bobbed gently on its hook as she walked to the old weaving house, an open pavilion of cedar and stone at the far end of the rye field. The loom inside slept beneath a linen cloth. Lyra pulled the cloth aside. The loom yawned, wood stretching like a cat, then rested, expectant. "What question do I ask?" Lyra whispered into the cedar-scented night. The answer arrived, as all real answers do, inside her own voice. "Ask for what is already yours to carry," she heard herself say. So she asked, "Show me the first thread." For a long breath, nothing. Then a pale filament emerged from a place that was not a place, angling down through the rafters like the beginning of rain. It was the color of a promise spoken too softly to be heard at noon, the weight of a feather and the strength of braided water. Lyra reached for it with 2 fingers, and it did not resist. She fixed the thread to the first peg of the loom. "Thank you," she said, though she did not know to whom. She looked up, expecting the next thread to appear. The sky waited. So did she. There was no hurry. She felt her chest rise and fall, rose and fell again, until the rhythm of breath and the rhythm of night matched. Another filament descended, then a third. She fastened each with the patience of someone binding a book for a dear friend. Dawn began to breathe behind the hills, a pale inhale. The loom spoke at last, wood to palm. Not words exactly, a suggestion. Weave not for brightness, but for belonging. Lyra began to lift the shuttle. When the village woke, they found the sky a shade more whole, a shade more sure. Children blinked and smiled without knowing why. An old man touched the scar above his eyebrow and found it lighter than the day before, as if a moth had come to rest on it and stayed. Lyra slept through the morning, a spill of dark hair across her pillow, palms warm with work she did not yet understand. Ilawan watched her daughter and knew a season had turned. The path is gentle, she told the empty room. May it be kinder than mine. Night after night, Lyra returned to the loom. She made a practice of silence. She made a study of breath. She learned to ask simple questions and wait for generous answers. Threads came, threads settled. The sky healed in small places, as gardens do. Then the unraveling deepened. It began at the rim of the world, where the ocean met the thought of sky. Constellations at the horizon bled into dusk, their edges smudged, their names hard to remember. The lantern of returning no longer pointed toward home. It pointed nowhere in particular. Sailors saluted it politely and put their faith in currents. Children asked their grandmothers new names for old patterns, and the grandmothers, brave as ever, invented songs. Lyra felt the change like a draft under a door. She fastened one last thread to the night and watched the rest slip away, not torn, simply tired. "What am I not asking?" she murmured. Instead of a thread, a moth fluttered down, heavy with sleep, wings the color of linen dyed in dusk. It circled the loom's frame once, twice, then hovered before Lyra's face. In its dark bead-like eyes, she saw reflections. Fields at night, a storm's gentlest edge. Her mother's hand smoothing a braid. "Little one," said the moth, not aloud, but the way water answers a stone. "You are weaving the visible." The unraveling began in the place light keeps its memory. "Where is that?" Lyra asked, her voice small so the moth's answer wouldn't break. "In the east," the moth said, "beyond the last lighthouse, where dawn turns back to look at itself." "I can't leave," Lyra said, and startled at the truth in it. The village needed light. The loom needed hands. Her mother needed... But Elowen's voice rose in memory. "We do not force the night. We invite it. Invite what does not yet know it belongs." Lyra extinguished the lantern she hadn't lit and tied her hair with a strip of cloth. She left a note for her mother beneath the salt jar. "I'm going to ask the horizon a question." She walked at dusk, when day and night negotiated kindly. The road to the harbor was a ribbon cool beneath her feet. Crickets tuned themselves. The first star did not hurry to appear. On the bluff above the water stood the lighthouse, its glass eye shut for evening. The keeper, a woman with shoulders like good oars, sat on the steps eating an apple. going east?" the keeper asked, reading the braid of Lyra's hair as if it were a map. "I'm going where the sky remembers itself," Lyra said. "Ah," the keeper said, as if someone had finally said the honest part of a story. She finished her apple, tossed the core to the hill, "For the deer," and stood. "The east is a patience, not a direction, but the tidal path will carry you thin as a wish. Follow the kelp so dark it looks like ours." Lyra bowed gratitude. The keeper pressed a small tin into Lyra's hand. Inside lay 3 salt pearls and a scrap of parchment, with a single word: return. "The sea listens to that word," the keeper said. "Say it if you forget how to be brave." Lyra stepped onto the shore. The sand received her like a letter slipping into a careful hand. She waited for the wave that felt like permission and walked forward. The water lapped her ankles, her calves, her knees, and then she was floating, not above the sea but among it, buoyed by kelp and the memory of moonlight. The village roof lights gathered at the cliff's edge to watch her go. Night placed a light shawl over her shoulders. The shore fell behind, the way a beloved voice fades at the end of a song, not gone, only moving into a place you carry. Lyra slept and woke, and could not tell when she did either. The sea blurred such lines. The moth traveled with her, careful as breath, occasionally brushing her cheek like a benediction. They drifted past a chain of dark islands where the wind slept standing up. They crossed a shelf of shallow water, bright as a thought, where fish wrote silver sentences and erased them with their tails. Once, before dawn, Lyra heard a long, low chord, like whales teaching each other the word for hush. On the 4th night, or perhaps the first large night in which everything else was threaded, Lyra saw the horizon do something she had never seen. It turned and looked at her. Do not imagine a face. The horizon does not trouble itself with faces. It turned as a tide turns inside a heart, as a decision turns its palm upward. Lyra understood. She was expected. "Then I should arrive neatly," she whispered, smoothing her hair and the thought of herself. She touched the tin and felt the 3 salt pearls arrange their quiet weight. "Return," she said, and the sea steered. The place where dawn looked at itself was not a shore, not exactly. It was a wide, pale room with no walls and a floor made of first light. The water became a carpet without telling anyone it had changed. Lyra stood and found no wet at her ankles, no cold. The moth settled on her shoulder and slept. In the center of the room stood a loom taller than the sky by half. It was made of beams cut from the first trees, plain to a softness even memory would envy. Across its frame hung no threads, only empty patience. The emptiness glowed. Lyra bowed to the loom the way you bow to a wise elder who has turned into weather. "I've been weaving the night," she said softly, "but the night is unraveling from a place that remembers more than I do." The loom breathed. Or perhaps Lyra finally noticed the breathing that had always been there. Air moved through her, as if she were the instrument and the room were the musician. The emptiness on the frame did not remain empty. Tiny motes rose from the floor and hesitated in the air, like unchosen words. "Ask," breathed the room. "What did we forget?" Lyra asked. The motes arranged themselves into a pattern so simple, her throat tightened. A circle, open at the top. The shape of a hand that does not close. The shape of a bowl that receives. We forgot how to be held, answered the room. Lyra's palms warmed. She remembered her mother's hands cradling the moon's thread. She remembered her own hands learning baskets from reeds that wanted to listen. Then show me how to weave a holding, she said. One mote settled on her fingertip and became a filament. It was not light. It was the willingness of light. It had the taste of tears you do not need to apologize for. Lyra anchored it to the lower beam. Another filament came, cooler, like shadow at noon. Another, warm, like bread being considered by an oven. She worked without thinking, which is to say she thought with more of herself than usual. As the warp took shape, the horizon hummed. Lyra lifted the shuttle and began the weft. Breath in, breath out. Belonging in, bewilderment out, returning in again. The pattern did not repeat so much as remember. She wove until her shoulders loosened into the work, and the work loosened into song. When she paused, the empty room had changed. It was less empty, and she was less alone. The air now wore a fabric that could drape itself over any world. The moth woke and traced the edges with patient approval. "What is it called?" Lyra asked, running her hand along the weave. It shivered in a way that did not mean cold. "It is called not against," said the room. "Some call it mercy." Lyra laughed softly. "Our village calls it enough," she said. "We say, enough for this hour, enough for this heart." "Then you have always known," said another voice. "Elohins, and not Elohins." Lyra turned. Her mother did not stand there, and yet her mother's steadiness had entered the room. We weave light so dreams have roads, but we weave mercy so travelers have rest. Lyra let the shuttle rest. "What if I take this back?" she asked. "What if I lay it over the night like a blanket?" The horizon turned again, the way a friend turns to make space on a bench. "Take what you can carry," it said, "and remember, belonging is not a map. It is a doorway that moves with you." Lyra folded the fabric, which felt both heavier and lighter than it looked, and placed it in the lantern she had not lit. The lantern closed around it with the contentment of a finished sentence. On the shore that was not a shore, the sea waited without pretending to be patient. Lyra stepped toward it, then stopped. "If there is more to learn," she said to the room, "show me a teacher whose language is slower than mine." The room smiled without corners. "Follow the river that climbs," it said. "Rivers don't climb," Lyra murmured, but the moth shook its wings. "In some places they do." The sea carried her back to a coast she did not know. Here the sand was pale green, as if old glass had decided to be shore. Beyond the dunes, hills rose in a soft procession, and between them, yes, a river climbed. It moved uphill with the serenity of a grandmother who refuses to explain her magic. Lyra stepped into its shallows. The current curled around her ankles like a cat greeting a homecoming. "Teach me," she said. The river's answer was the slow tilt of its body over stone. It showed her how to ascend without proving anything. It showed her how to make a path where seeing the path was not required. It showed her the sound of water saying yes for so long then anything harsh gives up and becomes smooth. Along the bank, grass bowed and rose, not to the river, but to wind and to the fact of being grass. Lyra walked beside the climbing water until her breath matched its stubborn gentleness. The moth flew ahead and perched on a silver branch that grew out of rock. Above them, a ridgeline drew itself into a sentence. Beyond the ridge lay a valley where night came early to practice. In the valley's center stood a village that might have been Lyra's village if time had taken a different staircase. Doors glowed with honey light. A child ran carrying a lantern, and Lyra's throat tightened. The lantern was hers, or would be, or had been, or something the river could explain if it felt like boasting, which it never did. She walked into the village, and no one stared because no one was surprised. Visitors in the valley wore the look of people who found what they had forgotten and were considering how to be grateful without making a fuss. A woman stirred a pot and hummed Lyra's grandmother's bedtime tune, as if the tune had learned to live here. A man mended a net with knots that looked like the word stay. At the square's far end stood a low building, roofed with slate, its windows open to what wind arrived. A sign hung above the door, not painted, woven, House of Restorations. Light moved inside the way water moves when it knows it is being welcomed home. Lyra entered. The room smelled of nutmeg and rain. On the left, shelves held broken things that had stopped being sad about it. A cup whose crack made the tea taste like persistence. A chair whose wobble taught careful sitting. A clock whose missing tick reminded its owner that seconds are not the only units. On the right, shelves held mended things that wore their scars like maps. An elder looked up from a table scattered with thread and sand. Their eyes were the color of good earth. Daughter of the moon weaver, they said, as if naming the weather. You've brought naught against. Lyra placed the lantern on the table. How did you know? It traveled ahead of you, the elder smiled. Mercy always does. Show me. Lyra opened the lantern. The woven fabric unfolded in a breath, then lay across the elder's arms as if it had been waiting to be held by someone whose bones knew season from inside. The elder closed their eyes. Ah, they said, you learned from the horizon the lesson the mountains taught me, that strength is the shape softness takes when it lasts. Lyra felt a question rise and allowed it to finish arriving. Will it reweave the night? She asked. Everywhere? No, said the elder, and Lyra almost flinched until the elder's voice finished its sentence. It will reweave what is ready. The rest will come when it is time to be ready. They cut a square from the fabric with shears that did not cut so much as persuade. Take this to the place where people wake in fear, they said. Lay it over their roofs. Come morning, they will not know why they slept, only that they did. Where is that place? Lyra asked. The elder looked at her with a kindness that had practiced for years. Wherever you remember being little, they said. Mercy arrives quickest at old doorways. Lyra thought of a cottage by the rye field, of a bed that was sometimes too small for her questions, of a night when wind tore something she could not name. She wrapped the square and bowed. Outside, the valley held its breath and then released it slowly. Release, teaching itself. Lyra followed a lane that led nowhere in particular, which is where lanes worth trusting often go. The moth drifted close, and Lyra realized it was not only companion but compass. It settled wherever the day's gentlest truth stood. They walked until the lane forgot to be lane and remembered being path. The path remembered being grass. The grass remembered being hill. Lyra climbed and did not count steps. At the ridge, she turned. In the distance, far beyond the silver branch and the climbing river, beyond even the shore like old glass, she felt her village like a pulse in her palm. "Return," she whispered, not as an order, but as an invitation. Wind gathered the word and stitched it to the evening. Lyra walked home at a pace the body thanks you for. When she reached the bluff, the lighthouse's eye was lit, a patient spiral of reassurance. The keeper lifted a hand from her chair and tipped her cap. On the steps beside her sat Elowen, shoulders wrapped in a shawl the color of clouds that have forgiven themselves for raining. "I went east," Lyra said, sitting at her mother's feet. A child again, where being a child was not a smallness, but a shape. "I know," Elowen said, fingers in Lyra's hair. "Your question woke the sparrows." She smiled at the lantern, "And you brought back a way to hold the night without asking it to be anything but night." Lyra watched the beam sweep the sea, sweep the town, sweep the hills. It touched nothing and somehow blessed everything. "Can I lay it over our roofs?" she asked. "Tonight?" "Do," said the keeper, who had seen weather enough to trust the quiet tools. "There's a restless wind at the north edge." Lyra rose with the square the elder had cut and walked the street that forgot to echo after dusk. She draped the fabric over the ridge of the first roof. It settled as if it had been waiting for exactly that ridge, exactly that roof, exactly that hour. She moved to the next house and the next, leaving a hush behind her shaped like belonging. At her own door, she paused. Elowen stood in the frame, lantern at her hip. "There is more to do," Elowen said, not as a demand, but as a fact that smiled. "But listen." Lyra listened. The village did not make a sound it did not need to make. Sheets breathed on sleeping chests. A window clicked into the right place. Somewhere, someone laughed softly in a dream and did not wake to apologize. Above them, the sky gathered itself. Constellations returned as one returns to a table where a chair has been kept. The lantern of returning steadied, then brightened, then simply became itself. No fanfare, just the relief of a name remembered. Lyra took her mother's hand. "I will go again," she said, not restless, not heroic, only sure. "Of course," Elowen replied, the way night says of course to stars. "And you will rest again. And in the resting, you will learn the parts of the sky that do not answer to effort." They sat on the step and watched the moon climb, like a blessing that had learned stairs. The moth slept on the doorpost with its wings slightly open, a soft bracket around the word home. If you wake in the night, dear listener, and find the sky thinner than it was, if your thoughts pull at a loose thread and worry you will unravel, remember Lyra beside the loom, breath slow, hands steady, weaving not brightness, but belonging. Remember the horizon that turned to make space. Remember the river that climbed without explaining how. Remember the square laid over your roof when you did not even know to ask. You are not against the night. The night is not against you. Close your eyes a little more. Imagine the shawl of not against spreading across the dark, stitch by gentle stitch. Feel how the fabric finds you and does not ask you to move. Let the world arrive with your inhale. Let it allow with your exhale. Let the soft weight of enough settle over your heart like a cat that has chosen your lap. Sleep now. The moon weaver's daughter will keep walking. The lantern will keep its patient edge of light. The sea will carry questions to rooms that know how to listen. And when morning comes, quiet as a moth's wing, you will open your eyes inside a world held together, not by force, but by the long, generous thread of belonging. Rest. Rest again. Rest until rest becomes your language. Good night.